So before we go to the last item of the agenda, we are having a panel discussion, which I believe that will be also very stimulating in terms of what will come out of there. It is a panel, or the topic of the panel is optimizing policy management for effective implementation. In other words, we've said what we've said, but without implementation and without managing the process, we are likely not to achieve anything. Sometimes it's easy to talk, as they say in English, talk is cheap, but doing things, that's where it's important. And I think through this panel, we are trying to figure out how do we make sure that we can be effective in implementing that, so the management of these processes. Mr. Julie will be leading this panel, and I'm going to ask him to come in front and ask the panelists as well to join us on stage as he takes us through. Let's just give them a round of applause, please.
Thank you very much, Budnix. May I start by calling upon all the panelists for this session to come on stage. We were supposed to have 5 according to the original program, but we have changed it to 3. Now, without any order, just sit according to your choice, my good panelists. So let me take this opportunity to greet let me start with, was in our midst, I know and acknowledge that we've got our honorable council members of the TVET colleges. Our principals are here, deputy principals, members of the BMT, Student Representative Council are here, invited guests. I know also in our midst we have officials from TVET and all other invited guests. I take this opportunity to greet all of you. Good day, colleagues. Molweni. I know it's after lunch. I'm not going to be long with this, my good panelist. Fair share is going to be given to the plenary or to the floor so that they cover up with the 2 panelists that are not part. So, by way of introduction, my name is Matemba Julie. I work at Ikhala TVET College as one of the campus managers there. It's an honor for me to be given this opportunity to do a simple thing to facilitate, very important though, this very important session which forms part of the last panelists that we're going to have in the program. And I must maybe as a disclaimer say it up front that before I came in here, there was no advertisement. So I was simply headhunted by the program director just to drive this. In case people they ask, so it's a disclaimer, it was just headhunting. But of course, on a serious note, ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge and congratulate Lovedale TVET College about this initiative, because it seeks more than everything else to bring us together as a sector and start to acknowledge what is said to be a community of best practices. We are a region of the Eastern Cape, and we're very fortunate because Eastern Cape region, if you look at the outlay of the TVET, we are the only province or few amongst that are just having an identity of being one region, which is not cutting across maybe 2 other provinces as you would. So for sure, if we are able to build on this stone that Lovedale is putting before us today to continue, we will go to greater heights, of course. My good principals, of course, we know there are initiatives that we are making in terms of putting us together, but how we wish is that it should not be ending only on the highest level of the scheme of things, if I may use that term, in the TVET College. We know we've got good gatherings as principals, deputy principals, but we would want to see a situation where we are able, in all the facets of the operation of these TVET colleges, wherein we are able to gather and share these best practices. So with those few words, I'll now give to my panelists just to briefly introduce themselves. I'm not going to mention their names, just as an icebreaker before they get into the business of today. briefly just to tell us about themselves and the topic that they will be sharing to us. Then we take it from there. Over to you, my good panelists. I'll start from my far left.
Thank you very much, Facilitator. Good afternoon, colleagues. I am Punyezwa Vutuza, Deputy Principal Registrar at Goldfields TVET College. This afternoon, I'll be talking to you about communication, feedback, and dissemination mechanisms within the policy processes. It's important mechanisms, the three of them, because it relays with your consequence management, it relays with your monitoring and evaluation, it relays with your reviews within your policies. All those mechanisms can lead you to an effective and efficient policy implementation, as well as every stakeholder in the TVET sector will be informed and well know all the policies that are within the college. Thank you, Chair.
May you give a applause.
Hi everybody, I'm Benita Smith and I'm the Change Management and Digital Transformation Consultant for Lovedale, and I'm sure you'll find it quite ironic that the person who's there for digital transformation is the one with the notebook, while the two ladies have got the digital, and we'll speak later.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Ngane Matikizela Khenene. I currently serve on the council of the Buffalo City College as its interim chairperson. I am also an NEC member of the TVET TGC, which is the umbrella body for all TVET colleges. I am sad, however, to note that not all colleges have subscribed or are affiliated, and it's something that I need to work on to understand, because some of the issues that we're discussing here will find resonance and a platform for resolution. My topic that I have been given today is risk management, which is a very broad concept and as well as very important in terms of governance. However, in my deliberations and in my contribution, I would like to have us look at a broader terminology, not only risk management, but governance, risk, and compliance, because that's what the industry is moving towards. You can't have the one without the other. So I'm hoping to share some of those issues as we deliberate this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, let's give them a round of applause, a big one. Thank you very much, my good panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, trickling down from all the deliberation and engagement we've had as from yesterday, here now comes another very important aspect of our purpose in these 2 days. That is the topic that relates to optimizing policy management for effective implementation. A lot has been said, but now how do we ensure that all the policies that we have developed are indeed managed and implemented for the success of the institutions that they are supposed to guide? Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we need to start and acknowledge that if we go around and check the issue of policy implementation, it's a big challenge. I know all of us here, we are in one way or the other involved in a policy implementation. It affects us. But you can agree with me, it remains a big challenge in every facet of our operations, the part of the implementation. Then therefore the panel must indeed help us, to get some insight in terms of that aspect. What is it that is lacking? What is it that we need to do to ensure that the policies that are developed are implemented? In the cycle, of course, of a policy, because a policy has got a big cycle unto it, but this one, it seems to be lacking in many ways. And ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me when we say, or I say that where there is an advancement of development, an indicator would be that a policy in that space has been effectively implemented. When you see people doing things, good things, maybe it's a school, maybe it's a college, you will agree that there is an effective implementation of policy in that space. So I think that is very important for us to note as we engage or about to engage the panelists. And again, another very important issue that we need to also take note of, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that the lack of policy implementation, what it does to us as people that are supposed to implement that policy, there's many things that it does to us. Perhaps people need to stop and think about, maybe I'll share one or two. For instance, if you look at the cycle of a policy and the manner in which, and the resources and the energy and the time that we invest when we are developing a policy, when that policy is not implemented, you'll agree with me to say you have totally wasted the time and the resources of the state, and including the time of the people who are involved. Because you have developed this policy, but unfortunately, you are not now implementing it. That is another area which is also important, which must be addressed when we talk about what is it that we need to do going forward around the issue of policy management for effective implementation. Lastly, let me share and say, you will agree again with me, in every facet of the operation of the college, you'll find out that there's too much focus and emphasis on the policy development. 1, 2, 3 days, we're developing a policy. 1, 2, 3 days, we're developing a policy. 1, 2, 3 days, we're developing a policy. But the question, are we implementing that policy? So in a way, we need to have a sense of balance between the development and the implementation. Maybe through the insight that I'm going to share, panelists will be able to go out here and say, much as we invest too much time on the development of the policy, we must also take time to ensure that we manage and we implement the policies. I think if we could be able to reach out to that, we'll be able to get to the second level of our vision as the TVET colleges. Having said that, I will give to our panelists to take us through, but I will simply ask a few probing questions. I'll start from my far left with Mrs. Vutuza, who has just done her introduction about the topic that she's going to address. Ms. Vutuza, what innovative ways or strategies can be employed to effectively disseminate the policies to all relevant stakeholders in the TVET colleges? I think it's about the keyword there, it's about the dissemination of those policies.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I would like to talk about is our LMS. I know all colleges currently have LMS system. How are we using it? All of us as staff members, are we showing it only to academic services and say it's not part of us? Only academic services must use it. One other way to disseminate these policies, we can upload them as interactive modules or micro-learning courses. Use quizzes to upload on those LMS. I know most colleges, lecturers, I'm sorry, they would fight. I don't know why LMS is an animal. Most lecturers doesn't want to use it. If you can familiarize ourselves with LMS, play around it, we'll also, if also policies are posted there, then that's one way of disseminating those policies. Just have quizzes so that even students can play around and they get to know those policies. We may have podcasts, we may have webinars. We invite experts to discuss policy changes in accessible format. That's another way that we can disseminate our policies. One other way, we need to involve our stakeholders, community and industry as well. We need to have a feedback-driven rollout. How are we getting feedback from our stakeholders? We can conduct focus groups, for instance, or we have pilots before the full scale of development of our policies. so that we get feedback from all those stakeholders. How are these policies aligned to them as well? Then also, we can have your stakeholder engagements where you sit, just talk about policies. Invite all your industry, the community. There's one thing we usually forget, that community is part of us whether we like it or not. We'll develop policies, forget about the community or the environment that is around our colleges. What are they saying about us? What are they saying about our policies? Do they have a say in our policies? We tend to forget that they can also have an impact even in our programs that we're running, even in the management of our colleges. We can make use of the radio broadcasts. We use the community radios. Sometimes one of staff members would be there in the radio just to pose questions from the community about our policies. Let's not be afraid of getting our policies to the public. The public is the one as well that may assist us. Let's have partnerships. Partnerships, whether it's public or private. That's where we'll have engagement through the industry stakeholders, roundtable discussions about the policies. Also, let's not forget to involve our students. They need to take part in those policies. We need to take down to the level, even if there's WhatsApps, we have some questions or questionnaires that we use, we post on WhatsApps, so that we get a feel even from the students. In that way, we'll also get a feedback to say, this policy, does it need to be reviewed, or is everyone understands the policy for implementation? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tuza, for that. Indeed, it's mouthful, ma'am, because you hear people saying, I don't know this policy, I'm not aware of it. Maybe it's because you are not disseminating, or your mechanism to disseminate it are not effective enough. Because a policy, good people, is not a secret of any organization. Actually, it's something that makes everybody to know that is part and parcel of that organization. Well said, ma'am, in terms of that. But another critical aspect of it is perhaps as you disseminate that information about whatever policy that we've agreed upon, critical aspect would be the feedback mechanism. The question would be, how do you integrate technology in terms of the feedback mechanism so that you are able to improve? Because remember, you have developed a policy, but you're not sure exactly if it's going to address the problem that you intended it to address. I mean, you can agree with me on that one. There are good policies in South Africa that are there to address social ills that we're faced with, but we still kept in the very same trap. Here there are policies. Perhaps it's because the feedback, it's not maybe finding, it doesn't have a way to reach out back to the developers of that policy. What would be your take on that one, ma'am, in terms of the feedback that we get? How can we integrate that to technology for us to improve as we disseminate? That is the second question. Thanks, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. There's one thing that we need to remember as the TVET sector, that our own department is committed to integrate ICT into our education. That on its own, there's a language policy framework for public higher education institutions. It aims to promote multilingualism and enhance communication across diverse linguistic groups. So which means in our minds, we need to know that there's a mandate also from our department that talks to ICT. We may have chat box for immediate queries. What we can do is to deploy AI-driven chat box on official websites. Each college, I know and understand, there's an official website. If we can put those in those websites, we answer common questions and then we collect user feedback efficiently. We can have webinars and virtual workshops. We utilize the same web conferencing tools to conduct regular virtual meetings. In that way, we're ensuring that all our stakeholders can participate. Our stakeholders can participate regardless of their geographical location. It means wherever they are, they can participate in, because we're using the virtual workshops. We can have a centralized communication. I spoke of the LMS before. Let's use that platform. Let's not leave it only to academic services. There's a huge usage and there's huge activities that are in that platform. We can have surveys, automated surveys, where we can also put them in the LMS. In that way, then we can also get most of the feedback. And then in that way, the feedback will be coming mostly from the ground. If it comes from the ground, that's when we get a feel as to, do all stakeholders know what's supposed to happen? Do they know what they need to do? So we really need to create and manage groups on social media platforms as well. We can use our Facebook pages for colleges. We can use LinkedIn to share information or gather informal feedback. Sometimes informal feedback, we can use it effectively as much as it's informal. It guides you. It gives you an idea as to where are you going or where am I at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Futuza, for that. Yes, I fully agree with you on that one, that it will assist a great deal towards we're moving forward. I are now. I know for a fact, for instance, from Lovedale TVET College, this practice relates to students, for instance, in terms of the policies. When a student comes, we ensure that everything that they need to get during induction and orientation, we simply put it on the student portal for them to simply access it on their cell phones, so that there is no excuse about whether they have received it or not. So I fully agree with you on that one. Thank you very much. I hope the plenary people are noting questions of interest and so on, clarity, so that when we are done, we're able to do. I'm moving to Ms. Smith now to get to the aspect of change management, because of course, when you're bringing this policy, new policy, people will always tell you, no, we used to do it like this, we know it works like this, we have been here for this time, and they said a lot of things, in a way trying to resist the process, but here is a change. We're moving to QCTO-oriented, competency-based qualifications now as a sector. But where are we in terms of moving with speed on that one? Because this is a policy change. Ms. Smith, I'm sure you'll share some light and insight on that. The question is for you, what are the key change management principles that should be applied to successfully implement new policies in the sector?
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to address all three questions that you asked together.
Thank you.
Simply because I think when you're doing change management, I've heard again and again today, let's not work in silos. So I don't want to repeat it again. So the three questions, or repeat that issue again. So the three questions that I was asked is, to the Chair's point, what are the key change management principles that you should apply to kind of successfully get a new policy in place? Secondly, how can we then address the resistance that comes because of change and among stakeholders to ensure that the new policy is smoothly implemented? And lastly, how do we activate leadership, basically? What role do they need to play in the implementation of policies? So like I said up front, you can't actually divorce those three. So if we have a look at change, I mean, we know what change is. Change is something we experience 60 times a day. They're big changes, they're small changes. Any kind of change is moving from a current state to a future state, right? If it's a small change, there's no problem. If it's a big change, like a policy change or digital transformation, for example, and to my colleague's point, I mean, she's talking about all these wonderful things that we can implement. You will notice if you haven't implemented them before, we all get very excited about the conversations about implementing digital until you actually do it. And you realize that even students who we think are digitally au fait and they play games, and you'll hear lecturers say, and at schools as well, you'll often hear people say, the students will get it, it's the lecturers you need to worry about. But there's a heck of a difference between using technology for social media and using technology for learning. Those are two different things completely and require completely different skills. So there's a lot of change management that is needed for all the fantastic ideas that my colleague has given us here. So the first one of the ways, it's only one of the ways in which you implement change management is to bring about strong policies and procedures, right? So people are guided what they need to do at any given time. So it'll give you the structure that you need, you'll make sure it links to your strategic goals, because what often ends up happening is the tail wags the dog, and a lot of our policy implementation is reactive. So we do things because the DHET tells us, well, you haven't done A, B, and C, or somebody else tells us you haven't done D, E, and F. So we identify gaps because other people are being punitive, and then we put policies in place. And it's almost like closing the stable door, after the horse is bolted, basically. So a very important thing about policy creation is being proactive, understanding what your environment is. You may not know all the answers. So a big part of being a leader up front is understanding, where do I want to end up? I might not know how to get there, but I know where I want to end up because it's going to solve A, B, and C. And so then you start bringing in policies to implement elements of those plans, right? So it's a very targeted process. You can't just have a policy that says the college is now digital. Okay. So if you want to have riots with your lecturers, your students, with everyone, write a policy that says we are now digital from tomorrow. Okay. So how do we do it? If this is the problem, how do we do it? So let's just have a look at those structured ways in which change should be managed, whatever it is, whether it's digital transformation or anything, like I said, should be done. So firstly, my colleague also mentioned the stakeholder engagement and communication. Really important that you start this as early as possible, okay? Now, I want to make a comment here that might actually end up being quite controversial. But I think we often mistake, or maybe we don't utilize it properly, stakeholder engagement, broad-based stakeholder engagement. Because we tend to talk to the community, we talk to our students, we talk to all our lecturers, we talk to the unions, we talk to everybody. And everybody who's ever done that will probably tell you that you come out more confused at the end of that process than you started out, right? So it's great to have lots of consultation, but you've got to manage that consultation very, very carefully. Like I say, you need to know what that big picture is and where you want to end up. What you're using stakeholder engagement for is to understand where your challenges are going to be, all right? Everybody's opinion is important, but you're using it not to help you formulate the policy, but to help you understand the challenges that will lead to the development of the policy. Okay, remember, you are the leadership of the college. It is your job to do this. It's not the community's job. You want them to consult. You want the unions to consult. You want the SRC to consult, but it's your job. Your job is to make all of those people happy, and that is why you develop a policy which addresses all the challenges that you've identified in those stakeholder consultations. Also, communication has got to be very transparent. Don't lie. Don't obfuscate. Tell them exactly what I know, what I don't know, okay? And you can do that very authoritatively. You can go, I know what the big picture is. I may not know how to get there. That's why I'm consulting with you, but I'm telling you where we are in this process. It's a very important part of change management. If you're in any organization, think about yourselves at any given stage, you would end up being the most unhappy with a change when you haven't been consulted, people haven't communicated, you come to work the next day and suddenly there's a new policy or a new thing, or now I must do this or whatever. Right? It's very frustrating. And even people who are very supportive of their environment, love being lecturers, love being leaders, start to become negative because they weren't consulted in some sort of way, and because people didn't ask them. They know something's not going to work, but nobody bothered to ask them, okay, as to how. So that's very important. So when you are communicating transparently, what is the change? What is the reason for the change? You know, we lecture students, and in my case, high school children, right? What we forget is that adults learn differently from students. And a big part of andragogy is give people the reason that they're doing something. So it's not we're just making this change, explain why that change is necessary. And it's not because the DHET said so. It's because what are the valuable, what are the value adds? How's it going to make your life different? How will it improve your life? That's the reasoning that you give. And then the last is what's that impact? So we're going to make all of these changes. For the short period, you're going to have a heck of a lot of work. You're going to do this, this, and this. But at the end of the process, you're going to be able to do that, that, and that. So these are the impacts. Don't lie about the impacts. Because we all go, oh, this is fantastic, we're going to do all of this stuff, and then they start doing the work, and that's when people start getting upset, right? So keep doing that. Also important about communication and stakeholder engagement, it's not a once-off thing, it's a daily thing, all right? And when I say it's a daily thing, it doesn't mean you must send an email or a WhatsApp or have a big plenary meeting or have Benita sit up in front like this. It is every manager, every lecturer, every general worker's job to buy into that communication and in their own job be the change, if that makes sense, right? So you've got to make sure that people are well prepared and are able to carry that out in the classrooms and on the fields. Every time somebody talks to them, the change is a conversation. It must be in your conversation, okay? All right, then policies mustn't be rigid. This is a big thing, and I think most policies are like that. We write these policies, they're great legalistic language, and nobody can understand them, and no one cares. They become these things that you just, I don't know, that you file, and that somebody can use if they want to kick your butt, when they want to kick you out of the college, or if you've got a legal issue, right? But if you've got proper policies, they will allow for phased implementation. So a policy can be developed over time, to my earlier point. You develop a policy. So if you are implementing digital transformation, then you're going to do it in a stepped approach. So only in the first step am I going to develop a policy and manage that. So it's like outcomes-based education, right? It's formative until you've got the entire policy. So you just have that phased implementation. It's also got to be reviewed periodically, obviously, for relevance. And lastly, contingency plans have to be in place for what if something goes wrong. So if you want to go digital, I can guarantee you that at some stage your Wi-Fi will collapse. I will guarantee you that your devices will be stolen. I will guarantee you there's just so much that can go wrong, right? So where in your policy and procedure are the contingency plans, the business continuity plans? And that will talk, I'm sure, to my colleague just now when we talk about risk management. That is done up front, not while you are in the process of it. It's part of the planning for change. Somebody else mentioned earlier training and capacity building, vital. And again, it's not a once-off thing. Remember, we talk about, there's been a lot of conversation about, and the maturity model earlier and so on, about being learner-centered. Remember, you're also a learner. We are lifelong learners. So when we are implementing change, you need to be very careful about the fact that you don't treat your colleagues, well, you lecturers, you should know better. You should know. What's your problem? Are you stupid? There's often that attitude that if people are struggling, that they're labeled as stupid. So you have to apply those same principles where you work with, you train in plenary or in sessions, and then you work, there's a plan to work with individuals in your organization, like with learners, to identify where the issues are and to address those gaps. So it's a constant training, upskilling exercise. It's not a change management plan. Change management for any program happens continuously. I'm nearly there, I promise. I can also talk all day. I'm sure you could understand.
That's fine.
Leveraging technology for policy compliance, very important, but again, not for the sake of it. By introducing technology, and you must, absolutely, but by introducing things like Moodle, using OneDrive or SharePoint to store your documents, using WhatsApp or Slack or whatever it may be to communicate, those are new things. Each of those needs a change management plan, okay? You can't introduce something new to disseminate a change management plan for another program, right? So your plan has got to take into place what people are familiar with and build them up towards the change so that it is efficient eventually. And then probably last but not least, somebody also mentioned this in the last plenary session, performance management. You can have lots of carrots, lots of training, lots of motivation, lots of this is going to be so lekker. But if you don't have performance management, change brings resistance, right? So along with all the carrots, the training, the communication, the engagement, we're there for you, all of that, you now know how to do this. If you don't do it, there are consequences, right? Because the college, with all our stakeholder engagement, the college has agreed that this is the best for us. Okay, that is why the policy and procedure is in place, and if you don't adhere to that policy and procedure, there are consequences for that action, and serious consequences, so that people understand that that is the part of the way we are. So I just want to make the final comment here, is just to say, especially with digital, any change is difficult, but especially with digital, you'll find a lot of pushback from everybody. We've been consulting quite a lot now, from lecturers, from parents, from community. They've got serious concerns, and they are valid concerns. That doesn't mean we shouldn't implement digital. What it does mean is I need a change management plan that takes into account all of those issues, my risk assessment, and puts in place a robust set of policies and procedures that are user-friendly, not in difficult language, that are easy to follow, and are obviously supportive of my stakeholders. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And maybe I agree with you, Ms. Smith, in most of the responses you have made. But I can also state that there's also one that I'm picking when you talk of this change management that you are not mentioning, which you are doing. You were very smart. No, I was going to ask you 3 questions, then you said you're going to summarize. So maybe when you talk of policy change or change management, you must also talk about, I've got a question, but I'm going to ask it after I've given the third panelist member, Ms. Matikizela. Then I'll make that follow-up question to you. That one relates to the resistance. Just find a way to respond to it. Yeah. I'll hand over to Ms. Matikizela. Ms. Matikizela is going to handle the issue of risk management on this very same topic. But Ms. Matikizela, before you come in, I think you will agree, maybe even people in the House will agree with me on this one, that at least when former President Mbeki came into Parliament, and we were told that he found one of the oldest employees in the chambers there was working there, and then he asked him about his job, and then this old man said to him, "I am the tea boy." And then asked why. He said, "I'm a tea boy." Old as you are a tea boy. For how many years have you been working here in Parliament doing this tea? He said, "I've got more than 30 years now, I'm about to retire." He said, "Okay, we are told," he called the former Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, and said, he was the Labour Minister then, said, "Please quickly appoint him so that he's a director of tea, not a tea boy." I hope there was no risk on that one, because nobody said what this was a risk. But let's get to the real risks that are there when we're implementing the policy. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I think that was very smart of former President Mbeki. Colleagues, risk management is is a new concept in the public service, though it is not, because in terms of legislation, the governing framework around risk management we take from the Public Finance Management Act, as well as a number of treasury regulations that give guidance as to how the public sector ought to manage and deal with the risks that are there in the operation of the public service. But also in terms of the governance standards across the public service and the private sector, the King framework also provide guidance in terms of how risks are managed. I see that we have chosen to deal with risk, but as I indicated earlier on, the trend now is to look at integrated governance, risk, and compliance, because all those go together. And the reason for this is because there is a growing regulatory environment which requires a higher burden on organizations to manage risks. And in our circumstance in the higher education, in the public service, there's greater scrutiny from Parliament. There's a greater responsibility that the communities and the public we serve that demands accountability. And accountability is a key requirement for a good risk governance framework. The other point that I want to raise is that as a result of that, there is a move towards broadening the scope to look at governance, to look at risk, as well as compliance. And additionally, if you, on a day-to-day basis, people externally, you look at the work of the Auditor General. The Auditor General is the oversight body in the public service that looks after the management of public resources, and therefore it identified risk. But if you look at a report of an Auditor General today, it reports on past events, not on risks that are happening today, because the risk happens on a day-to-day basis. They can be human, they can also be technologically driven. So externally, it's the Auditor General. Internally in colleges where we are is the council, but also is the Audit and Risk Committee, as well as the CFO. However, the CFO is not meant to be the manager of risk, because organizations are supposed to have chief risk officers. However, in order to avoid duplication of structures for a management of risk, because risk is inherent in every unit or in every activity, it's meant to be managed at source, so that you do not create departments that are meant to follow through on risks that are identified. So just on an overview, I think I needed to open my input with that. The second one is that governance, compliance, and risk represent the capabilities or the procedures in an organization. We're here to talk about policy. Policy is expressed through practice, isn't that so? And if there's no expression of the policy, then it means that the policy is not implemented and therefore is not adhered to. And that happens when there is no compliance framework to monitor and to check whether there is compliance with policies in the workplace. A typical example you will find in most colleges, and I like doing this, that there is a security and access policy that is there on the website. And if you go today, including my college, I tell the principal all the time, when you get to the front desk or the front gate of the office, you get through the security personnel, mostly physical. You then move to another one so there's one book which you sign, and most of the time you are checked whether you are bringing a computer or not. The next level you land at is another security official who also signs. Those two functionaries are often outsourced in most instances. And therefore, their duty is to look at the security from a physical perspective. When you land onto the organization and you get to be inside, the identification of risk is meant to happen from an internal protocol perspective that says what are the risks that happen on a day-to-day basis, whether it's students coming in with documents or with items that could be hurtful, or it's an individual bringing in a computer that could infect all the other computers. We get into a boardroom, I borrow. So there's various nitty-gritties that at every level require that one needs to check what is the inherent risk that exists in your environment. There is a great increase in what is termed reputational risk in the public service these days. And one of the most glaring one in the TVET colleges is the risk that is brought on by other external factors, including the risk that is posed when students go on strike. It is a risk that is not in control of the colleges, but it poses the biggest risk to the academic year in terms of the disruptions that happen, but also to the safety and security. And yet there isn't a mechanism that deals with how does the college system or the higher education system manage those risks. So these are important. That one of the first things that one needs to do in identifying and managing risk is to identify the type of risk that exists in his or her organization. And I've mentioned the issue of security. I've mentioned the issue of disruptions caused by students for whatever reason they would be unhappy about. But there's also the risk of integrity in terms of a college that is known, for instance, for bad practices or for reports and after reports of corruption that you would find. That becomes a risk on its own. I don't need to mention the issue around academic qualifications, which has become the biggest risk in the higher education from colleges and higher and universities that are alleged to have brought or given qualifications. That on its own is a risk that universities and colleges must deal with. On an issue of moving forward, the cost of addressing and dealing with risk is very high, because it requires that you must have a system in place that must be able to identify the risks. And those risks must then be upgraded as well, because in terms of the audit and risk committee framework, each entity or each organization is supposed to have a risk management matrix that lists the risks in order of priority, and then must have a mitigation strategy to deal with those and identify. And one of the other things that is important, which I've mentioned, is the issue of establishing a risk reporting and oversight framework to manage and monitor those. And initially, I mentioned the structures that are responsible for that, internally and externally. Chairperson, my closing remarks, because we need to allow the plenary to ask the questions. When implemented in silos, I would like to end on that note that when implemented in silos, risk management is not effective. Hence the move towards governance that the council at the highest level must be able to monitor the risk metrics that I've spoken about, that the identification of the risks led by the finance directorate or the chief financial officer with a compliance unit. I'm not sure how many colleges have got a compliance unit. I think it's a new thing. I know in the public service, one of the highly effective compliance units is that of the Gambling Board. I know because they are a highly compliant organization. So it's very important that those three areas are looked into overall, so that there is a mechanism to look and be visible in terms of managing that risk. I would like to end on that note, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Let's give her a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much from all my panelists and their inputs and insight on this topic from different lenses, of course. Ma'am, maybe after the questions from the floor, you must keep a follow-up question that will have to respond as you would wrap up around the issue that you have mentioned of Auditor General having or doing backwardly in terms of avoiding debtors. What is it that needs to be done to avoid that, so that at least in the policy formulation we're able to incorporate, so that moving forward we're able to address that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open it now to the floor to ask questions to the panelists without any order, as you have been listening and your point of interest have been identified. Can I take hands? One from that side, two. It looks like we are going to be smart, program director. And then three, in that order. Let's first take these three. Over to you, ma'am. Can someone help with the roving mic? May we please start that side? Yes. Okay, it's fine. She can start in the interest of time. You go ahead.
Thank you, sir. My name is Zandile Soyiko, an SRC secretary from Lovedale TVET College, King Campus. Responding to the point of the speaker talked about communicating the change before time and giving reason for the change now. What is currently happening at Lovedale TVET College is that students were told that we will be changing to e-books. In the beginning of this year, and were told that they will be using their phones. In all honesty, we are against this change because we don't all have the resources to use e-books. And of course, there are labs where we could access the books in class, but what about when you want to revise at home as you would have if you had a physical textbook or a tablet or laptops provided by the college? Now what happened was the principal implemented change without making sure that the students are well prepared, which caused the unrest currently on our campuses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a member, I'll allow panelists to quickly respond so that we engage, even if you, I know Ms. Smith, you will have perhaps to lead on that one, because it relates to what I've asked and said back it, because it speaks about resistance to a change. That question, may you please share it?
Oh, well, no pressure. Zandile, that's fantastic. And this is exactly the kind of the input that person needs when it comes to change management. You want robust debate from everybody, respectful, which is what it was. And she raised a lot of very good points, and those will be taken into account when we've got our change management plan. Part of what we're doing is testing it in the environment, and you'll notice that at Lovedale we've got a very small cohort of students who are comparatively using ebooks so that we can test that on behalf of everyone else. And please rest assured that contingency plans are being put in place to support the students with all the issues that you actually have mentioned. And those will be forthcoming quite soon. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to
No, thanks.
add anything to Letu, but yeah.
You want to add, Program Director?
If I may, sorry, Chair.
Oh, okay.
If I may add on that, with change management, always there's a need for a phased-in approach. That's why in most instances, when you bring big changes, you have pilot, for instance, for so that you take the organization in stages. I remember when I was young, like the last speaker there, when I was still entering in the public service. I don't know how many of you remember that we used to have, was it 7 departments of finance in different provinces, but we now have 3. We have 1 department, which is the treasury. And when that whole restructuring was happening, you had to take about 5 years to merge into 1 treasury department, and it went in phases. So I think one of the suggestions one could also do is to say, how do you phase in the issue of technology and learning in different ways, taking into account the environment that you need to prepare for that. I mean, the issues around access to technology and access to data afterwards, after hours, how do you manage that? So my suggestion would be a phased-in approach would also help in some of the, change cannot wait, but phasing in would help.
Oh, thank you very much. Can we take the second question? Where's the mic? Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks, Chair. I don't think it's necessarily questions, but more than comments. Remember, in the strategic plans of our colleges, we actually do talk of business plans for e-learning, ICT, blended learnings. The reason as to why at some point we are expected to even run e-road shows on the strategic planning is actually that of facilitating the process of us having to develop such new things and communicating to our internal stakeholders specifically to say, which I think probably we're leaving out the students, because the strategy needs to be communicated to every internal stakeholder for them to understand what is in the strategy, so that when you actually introduce the new learning system or whatever kind, we can understand that it is derived from the strategy point of view. So we only try and manage change management because there's always resistance. What I also usually see is that within the policies, there's lack of procedure manuals that we need to take into consideration, whereby even if there's a policy, then institutions find themselves unable to necessarily implement that particular policy because there is no procedure manual, and that is expected to be developed by a particular deputy principal, of which they are not experts. Management are not experts in policy development. So we need to have that in mind as the sector. One other aspect that will facilitate and minimize issues of change management is us trying to have the culture of issuing circulars that will communicate a move that will be taking place within the institution, so that all our stakeholders can get an understanding of the processes and activities that are going to be taking place. On the issues of risk management, I would like to encourage you governors to say they actually need to strengthen the internal risk management committee by probably looking at using an external person to chair that particular committee. Because the internal one, other than the council one, you'd find that it is non-existent in some institutions, and that probably is shared by the very internal management, but they don't necessarily, some of them have an expertise in that space. Remember, COE of the colleges is bloated. If then we don't get additional support to have that expertise, it will always be found wanting. Yeah, let me end there.
Thank you, ma'am. The last question?
Just the last one, Chair. There is this thing that whenever we think about policy roadshows, we think about HR conducting roadshows. Corporate services and HR would conduct their roadshows clean and good. But other policies, in terms of communication, there are no roadshows that are conducted in order for the general stakeholders to understand them. Probably is one area that we need to improve on.
Okay. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Julie. Mine is just a comment or an advice. I think now it is high time that as institutions of higher learning or as colleges, we prioritize the services of the internal audit function. I'm saying this because an internal audit function is a body that is having an independent objective assurance, and that can also provide advisory services to the institution in terms of assessing and analyzing the effectiveness and efficiency of policies. So from the discussions that we are having here, or we've been having from yesterday till now, to me it becomes clear that policies are available, but unfortunately there is no communication of those policies to all the stakeholders of the institution. There is no understanding of the policies, there is no clear interpretation, and there is no commitment to uphold those policies when the need to implement them has arisen. So I think it is important that those services of the internal audit, because an internal audit function is an independent body of the institution. So if we can make use of that particular institution or that particular function, because now there's this issue of risk. There's this issue of risk. If a policy is not implemented, automatically a risk will arise. And it is important that when a risk arises, we analyze the risk, we assess the risk, we understand the nature and the extent of the risk, because a risk has got two sides. It is inherent. At the same time, a risk can be a detection risk. A policy itself has got a risk because it cannot address certain issues. So that is inherent. On the other hand, a policy may not be applied correctly, which will lead to a detection risk. So it is important that we ensure that we prioritize that particular service. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother. My panelists have got 3 minutes for you to do closing remark. I'll start with you, ma'am, and then in that order. In a minute, summary of what we... Thank you very much.
Just maybe with the last speaker, and I appreciate the comments from the rest of the people that have given. I want to ask a question to the room. When does a risk manifest itself? When do you know that there's a risk? It's when there's a problem. It's when there's a dispute. When do you know that you did not comply with your human resource policy? When there's a grievance? Yes, Masimiye go AG UPA. At the institutional level, those are indicators to you that your risk framework ought to pick up. It's everyday things. Is someone not speaking well to another colleague? It gives rise to the fact that there is disrespect. It's the question around the communication that is not done. And my other question is, who is responsible for communicating what in the organization? Is it HR? Is it the principal? Who must issue the circulars? So if there's a road show, one unit decides to do its road show and other units would have wanted to be there, how will they have that? So I'm posing these questions not necessarily to answer now, but as a takeaway home to say that when you look at the organization and identify risk, you look at the culture and how your problems manifest organizationally. And when you list those problems, then you can be able to do a risk assessment. You can know that these are the risks because these are the problems that are coming up. That is what I would want to say. I fully agree with the speaker around the internal audit. However, I am a creature of compliance. And I'm saying that colleges must be able to enforce or to establish, even if it's not a fully fledged, but a compliance department that is not in the CFO's office, but that must be able to monitor some of these things so that you can start to engage on these issues. And then the last thing that I would like to part with Chairperson, I think there was a question you asked about the issue that the Auditor General comes after. After you spent a year, then you receive an Auditor General report. But I think there is attempts now for the Auditor General through the work of the Audit Committee to do quarterly. But again, Council sits to receive a report of a past quarter. However, even though you can't throw the baby with the bathwater, it's a quarter. So you can still insist that whatever problems you picked up in the quarter you're reporting on, you make sure that the internal procedures and internal controls are such that you don't pick up on those problems in the following report. So there are ways of trying to avoid the fact that you get an Auditor General's report that is adverse when you had a whole 4 quarters to deal with some of the issues. And again, because I'm a compliance creature, the internal audit is fine, but because you have the committees that you have internally as well within the management structures, because even on the management structures, you should have similar structures that are able to look into these issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. May I give a round of applause? Those are closing remarks. Ms. Smith?
I love the fact that you say that you are a creature of compliance. I'm definitely not a creature of compliance, and I think that's probably evident by now, but I just wanted to leave you with final comments around that particular issue. I think if you've got huge transformation that is coming in any space, right, whether it be digital or anything else, my gut feeling says you don't start with policies, you allow the policies to develop from the ground up, so that you've got your stakeholder management, and from the engagement, from the comments that the SRC made, a lot of people are going to have all of those sorts of comments, and out of that will come your policies, and will become policies that people have built together and therefore are robust and are not just a dusty document sitting on a shelf. So my challenge to you, everybody here today, is everything you believe about policy making and change management, assume it's wrong and start again. That's how I feel. I challenge myself every single day to say, whatever you believe, imagine it's wrong. Let's look at it in a different way. And that's my challenge to you.
Thank you very much.
My last words would be, colleagues, if we do communicate, and not just communicate, but effectively, make sure that we disseminate our policies to all stakeholders and get feedback from all stakeholders that are involved. That will make all involved to understand all the policies. When the policies are understood by all stakeholders, they will be adopted by everyone. After being adopted, it gives everyone a chance to refine those policies. When they are refined, it means it gives us an effective implementation of all those policies. And then in that way, it will keep our policies relevant to the industry demand because we've involved everyone there. It increases our stakeholder engagement, and then it promotes continuous improvement because policies are reviewed now and again. Then there will be an improvement in those policies. It also ensures the training that will be provided, which will equip our students to be employable. It will give our students the necessary skills for the workforce out there. I want to say, lastly, effective policy making through these mechanisms, it contributes to the college's success and the employability of our graduates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. May we give them a round of applause? Thank you very much, my panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, this is bringing us to the end of this session for the panelists. I hope you've learned a lot. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, you agree with me that there's an urgent need for all of us going forward to pay close attention on this very important subject matter. Policies should be implemented, and that implementation should be managed. We need not to be managing by solving problems that always arise simply because we're not implementing the policies. People they agree here, policies are available, but let's ensure they are implemented. And then we don't need to only wake up when there's a risk, because Umem has asked a very profound question: when do we know when there's a problem? That relates to the culture of every organization. So, ladies and gentlemen, with those few words, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for being such a wonderful audience. And now I'm not going to wrap up everything in case I don't get this tender next time. I'll give it to Branix because I know he has raised his hand during that question of change resistance, and I sabotage him deliberately because I knew he's going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Branix.
Thank you very much, Mr. Julie. You did well. I just couldn't resist the temptation to say that's a beautiful case study, and I was really keen to hear how our panelists are going to address the case study that was posed by the SRC leadership. By the way, thank you very much for bringing a case study to the table. I thought that was really good. Thank you very much to this panel, Mr. Julie, for ably leading this panel and managing time so effectively. Thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists. It was really good. I don't know about you sitting here, but it feels like we could do this every day. We learn a lot from these kinds of interactions, and thank you so much. We're about to take a short break. Again, 10 minutes, and then yeah, let's follow the principal's example. Let's just give them a round of applause as we're going for a 10-minute tea break instead of 15 minutes. 10-minute tea break, and then let's be here. Let's all aim to be seated by 5 to 3. 5 to 3. Let's be back seated, so that we can have our last item on the on the program of the conference. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.